Do you think that the Trump administration would do that? It seems to me that they're trying to do their best not to bring Israel in because of the difficulties they would have with Israel. Because Israelis would do whatever they want to do. And that's going to be too difficult for them to manage Israel. This is, at least it was mentioned by in one of the articles on CNN. That, but the other point is how far Israel would want the United States to continue this war. Because Donald Trump has 2 more years, more than a little bit more than 2 years in office. And we're going to have the midterm elections. And later on, we have 2028 presidential election. And we know how these two important characters in the Trump administration, Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance, are somehow preparing themselves for 2028. And putting all that together and the calculation on the part of Israelis, how do you see the way that Israel sees, and considering the internal changes that are happening in the United States?
Well, I mean, the fact is the Israelis do not want us to reach an agreement with Iran that looks like the Memorandum of Understanding of June 17th. And by the way, if we get a new Memorandum of Understanding, the Iranians will have more leverage than they did last time. And the deal will be even better for Iran. The hardliners are now in control in Iran. It's not the moderates who fashioned the June 17th agreement with the United States. The hardliners will be in control now, and their demands will increase. Now, the Israelis do not want another Memorandum of Understanding signed and then operationalized. There's no question about that. But at the same time, the Israelis do not want this war to escalate in ways that, number one, we don't win, we meaning the Israelis and in the United States, and furthermore, that Israel gets attacked by Iranian missiles and drones. They don't want that. So they're in a very delicate situation here. They want the Americans to stay in the fight, but they also don't want to become a target themselves. They want the Americans to win the war in a way that allows Israel to remain on the sideline. I don't know how we do that. I don't think that's possible. And the point I've made on countless occasions, Nima, is we do not have a war-winning strategy here. It's just very important to understand that. Why did President Trump sign the June 17th memorandum, which is a surrender document? He signed it because he had no alternative. He has no good military strategy for winning this war. Now, for some reason, he thought that he could violate the Memorandum of Understanding and he could open up a channel in the Strait of Hormuz that was controlled basically by the United States. For some reason, he thought that the resulting tit-for-tat campaign would work to our advantage. I don't have the foggiest idea why he thought that. There was no reason to think it. But he apparently thought that once we started up the tit-for-tat campaign, this is on July 8th. Remember, the memorandum is signed on June 17th. On July 8th, the tit-for-tat campaign starts. And the end result is that we are in this conflict that we're not winning. So what is he going to do? As we were talking about before, he can't really escalate. He doesn't win if he escalates. It just gets worse. So I think that what he's going to have to do is he's going to have to move to get negotiations restarted and work out a new memorandum of understanding. And by the way, I've seen some evidence that the Qataris and maybe the Pakistanis are putting forward an idea of a 10-day ceasefire. And when I see that, I say, I wonder if this isn't the United States putting pressure on Qatar and Pakistan to get negotiations started again, because it's quite clear that this is not a result of pressure from the Iranians. And the Iranians have basically said that they're not interested in these proposals. But I think the Americans are interested in these proposals. I don't have hard evidence of that, but I think that it is the Americans who want to get negotiations started again. Why? Because the tit for tat campaign is not working out the way we appear to have thought that it was going to work out. And by the way, one subject we haven't mentioned, which is of enormous importance, is that we have a limited stockpile of weapons that can be used to wage this tit for tat campaign. One of the reasons that we ended the 40-day air war, which started this conflict, that's the air war that ran from February 28th to April 8th. One of the reasons we stopped it on April 8th was in good part because we were running out of munitions and we wanted to stop it, the air campaign, the strategic bombing campaign, before we depleted the inventory. So if you're engaged in a tit for tat campaign that's looking like it's going to go on for months and months and months, the question you have to ask yourself, if you're the United States, is where do you get the weaponry to wage this campaign?
I remember when the Trump administration was elected, they said, Pete Hegseth said, we're going to go to the Red Sea. We're going to teach these Yemenis, these Ansarullah, we're going to have a different sort of attitude. We're going to hit them hard, not the way that the Biden administration did. It's this time around going to be different. And when they started that operation, and after 2 weeks or 3 weeks, they have decided to get out of the Red Sea because of the difficulties, growing difficulties with the drones being hit by Houthis, by Ansarullah in the Red Sea. I thought that they're not going to open up a new front with Iran. I thought that that would be a huge lesson for the Trump administration. But it seems that they went with the war against Iran. And as you mentioned, the time is going on and the war is happening. And what amazes me a lot is that the Trump administration is repeating the same mistakes, not only with the war, with the Operation Freedom in the Persian Gulf. They started that operation for 24 hours, less than 24 hours. They have decided, because of the difficulties they had from Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, they said, you're not going to use our airspace, so you're not going to continue that. That Donald Trump said, oh, we're gonna end the operation. And right now with the MOU, they're repeating the same. And what is that? Is that they're feeling that every time the situation gonna change, or the new factors are coming in, or it's somehow repeating it themselves somehow, because that looks so stupid. Looking at the attitude, it's so unbelievably, nobody can understand what's going on with the administration. Well, how do you understand that? This repeating the same mistakes over and over and believing that something new may come out of this?
I have no answer to that question. I can't figure out what they're thinking myself, as I tried to make clear. We have no war-winning strategy. Trump obviously found it difficult to swallow the 17 June Memorandum of Understanding, and he decided that he could try to push the Iranians around by, creating this U.S.-dominated channel in the Strait of Hormuz. Why he thought he could do that, why he thought he could get away with it, I don't know. Why he thinks that he can win a tit-for-tat campaign against Iran when he couldn't win a strategic bombing campaign against Iran in the early weeks of this war escapes me. I just don't get it at all. I think it has to do mainly with the fact that there are a lot of people around Trump who are dissatisfied with the Memorandum of Understanding of June 17, and they want him to go back on the offensive and see if he can get a better deal. But do any of those people have a military strategy in mind that will allow Trump to succeed? I think the answer is clearly no. Nobody's been able to put out or tell a story about how we can use military force. Let me make a point or two about the issue you raised regarding the attack on the Houthis that happened in early 2025. Of course, President Trump comes into the White House in January of 2025. And then in March, he says, as you made clear, that we're going to get tough with the Houthis and we're going to defeat the Houthis. The Biden administration was filled with pussycats and they were unwilling to really get hard-nosed or play hardball with the Houthis. And we're going to do that. Well, by May of 2025, we quit. And by the way, Nima, one of the reasons we quit is we were using up precious ammunition. There was the first big piece of evidence that we had limited amounts of precious ammunition, and we were using it up against the Houthis, number one. And number two, we were not defeating the Houthis. So that war ended, and it was a failure. It's very important to understand that we failed. Then the second big event, which you didn't mention, was the 12-day war in June of 2025. This is June 13th to June 25th. The Israelis start the war, and they do most of the fighting. There's that one day, it's June 22nd, where we bomb a series of nuclear installations inside of Iran. And at the end of that one day, Trump declares victory. He said that he has obliterated Iran's nuclear capability. And then, of course, the war ends on June 25th. And the United States and Israel portray this as a victory. And I think that the sense that we were successful in the 12-day war helped lead Trump to conclude before the February 28th attacks on Iran that we could use military force again against Iran and we would prevail. We would produce a decisive victory. The problem is that our goals were limited in the 12-day war. We went after nuclear installations. But the February 28th war, which of course is still going on today, had very ambitious goals. You remember we said we had four particular goals. Number one was regime change. Number two was to end Iran's nuclear enrichment capability. Number three was to end their long-range missile program. And number four was to end Iranian support for the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas. These are remarkably ambitious goals. And most importantly, you're talking about regime change. You weren't talking about regime change back in the June 2025 war. And once you go to regime change, you have to ask yourself, how are you going to get regime change? And almost everybody understands the only way you get regime change is with boots on the ground. This is what happened in Iraq. March 19th, 2023, we went to war against Iraq. We invaded Iraq. That's how we got rid of Saddam Hussein, with ground forces. Well, President Trump was convinced by the Israelis, by Benjamin Netanyahu and David Barnea, who's the head of Mossad, that they could use air power alone to cause regime change in Iran. This is a remarkably foolish idea. The evidence that this is not possible is overwhelming. And this is why many of Trump's principal supporters thought that accepting the Israeli idea that we should go to war on February 28th, and with a shock and awe air campaign that included decapitation of the regime leadership, we would win a quick and decisive victory, was delusional. It was delusional. And many of Trump's advisors thought that. But Trump himself was convinced by the Israelis that we had a war-winning strategy. And off we went to war on February 28th, and it failed. And it's hardly surprising that it failed. Again, the evidence is overwhelming that air power alone cannot cause regime change. Nevertheless, Trump decided he would try to do it. So the key point here is that this operation that started on February 28th was much more ambitious. And Trump, who had long argued that he was going to avoid regime change, fell into the trap of pursuing a regime change operation against a country with 93 million people that was fully capable of absorbing huge amounts of punishment and not surrendering. And the end result is we're in the total mess that we're in today.
One of the major issues in the West Asia is the case of Palestine, is the case of Lebanon, is the case of Syria. Because Syria was supposed to resolve the Israeli problems or the problems in the region, but it seems that it's getting more difficult because of the complexity of the issue of Syria right now. There is no powerful government there or someone who's capable to manage the country. We have the presence of Turkey, the United States, Israel in the south. The thing is so complicated right now in Syria. The Lebanon case is the same way somehow. You have the Israeli occupation of the southern part of Lebanon. They have defined a yellow line the way they did in Gaza. And going to the West Bank and Gaza, you know that how difficult is that. The settlers in the West Bank, it's, I would say, impossible to remove the settlers from the West Bank. And because you look at the West Bank today, some little points on the map when it comes to the PLO and the Palestinians in the West Bank. Here comes the question is that in the eyes of the Iranians, in the eyes of the acts of resistance going from Yemen to Iran to Iraq to Lebanon, they all see the issue as one. It means that the occupation and the case of Palestine and the occupation in Lebanon as well. But in the eyes of Washington, they want to isolate these conflicts. With Iran, it's all about Iran and the United States. With Lebanon, it's about Israel and Lebanon. With the Gaza, it's going to be between Israel and Palestinians. How is that going to be possible for Washington to understand? Do you think that after all, the war is changing somehow the region, but how is that going to help Washington to understand that these are all connected? You cannot separate one from another. And how is that going to happen in the near future, or maybe in a decade?
Well, all these conflicts are connected. You're exactly right. And let's just talk about Hezbollah and Lebanon, especially the Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon. If you look at the Memorandum of Understanding, the first article number 1, deals with Lebanon, unsurprisingly. And that means it deals with Hezbollah. And this tells you very clearly that the Iranians are deeply committed to maintaining close relations with Hezbollah, Hamas, and of course the Houthis. Remember, the Houthis today have announced that they're closing down the Red Sea to the flow of Saudi oil. This shows you just how closely the Iranians and the Houthis are to each other. And the same thing, of course, is true with regard to Hamas, but especially with regard to Hezbollah. Now, moving forward, I would be willing to bet that what will happen here is that the Iranians will insist, before they agree to another memorandum of understanding, that the Israelis have to get out of southern Lebanon. That was, in effect, part of the 17 June memorandum, but the Iranians did not push hard on that issue. It looked like the memorandum of understanding was going to be operationalized without the Israelis getting out of southern Lebanon. I don't think that will be the case in the next memorandum of understanding. I mean, who knows for sure? But this issue is not going away for the reasons that you stated, that these conflicts are all interrelated. Now, very importantly, the Israelis understand this. And the Israelis' great fear is that the United States will sign a memorandum of understanding that limits their freedom in places like southern Lebanon, in places like Gaza, and with regard to the Houthis. That's what scares the Israelis. It's the Israelis more than the Americans who want to separate what's going on in southern Lebanon from what's going on between Iran and the United States, or what's going on in the Persian Gulf. And it's the Iranians who say you can't do that. The Iranians want to maintain the axis of resistance. So it's not clear how this is all going to play out moving forward. But the Americans are going to be in a very difficult situation no matter what, because the Iranians are going to put huge pressure on us to get the Israelis out of southern Lebanon and to get us to limit what Israel can do in terms of attacking Hezbollah. On the other side, the Americans are going to be pushed hard by the Israelis and by the lobby in the United States not to curtail Israeli operations in southern Lebanon against Hezbollah. And how the United States reconciles this set of opposing forces is very hard to say.